So welcome to everyone that is with us today. We'll go ahead and get started. So those of you who haven't met me before, I'm Annabelle Munson, and welcome to the Universal BizAv Ops Update webinar and Meetup. I'm your host and moderator. Welcome back. I do see a lot of familiar names, and I'm seeing some faces, which is always the best. Okay, so let's move on from there and get started with today's topic. So more exciting news has developed recently for private aviation, and it all is about additional access. So dare we say it, international travel is getting just a little bit easier, at least in some select regions. I know we talked about this a little bit in January when we were last together, but the trend does continue, and it is obviously one that we're very excited about. A host of countries have relaxed or even done away with their COVID restrictions, or have announced to do so very soon. But the key here is it's an uneven mix. Even now, some countries are making it harder to get in without proof of a booster shot on top of your 2-dose vaccine. And all the while, vaccine validity periods are also popping up as hard and fast requirements. But the rules for accepted validity periods vary wildly across borders. So as a result, COVID testing has now become even more important as a backup plan when passengers or crew end up out of date, and whatever that accepted vaccine window date is, or even just when restrictions change on the fly or unexpectedly. So news about business-related private aviation traffic. We are seeing signs of increasing traffic for sure going into Europe and the Middle East, and that's especially coming out of the US and Canada. The Middle East has multiple layers of complexity to jump through, however, with vaccines and COVID testing requirements, as our team is going to get into in the updates. And we have some very early stage, but news of slight openings in Asia Pacific. Those are being announced lately, which has been, of course, a long time coming. But with those slight reopenings come a very conservative approach to the international traveler access, definitely involving layers of vaccine mandates, quarantines, and COVID testing, all in a combination. I know our mission advisors and trip support will be emphasizing the need for you to set expectations with your passengers for any upcoming Asia Pacific travel. We know it's been delayed for a lot of you, and we do get the inquiries. So as far as those future and definitely still future trips occur, do start setting expectations now with your passengers that it will be uneven across the region when it comes to service. I actually sat in recently on an update from our Universal Aviation locations across the Asia Pacific region, where they discussed this anticipation of the demand that will rise across 2022 as things begin to open. And they in particular were focusing their efforts on being fully ready to meet the return to service when that happens. All right, and finally, we're going to end our conversation today talking about the spring. So specifically, spring in the Northern Hemisphere brings with it additional traffic demands to very popular leisure destinations in the Caribbean, Mexico, and Central America. I've asked some of our Universal Aviation experts from those regions to join us today to give us the inside view as to what's the latest there. Let me introduce you to who's on our panel today. Covering the worldwide overview, we have our trip support mission advisors, Adriel Wilson, Master Mission Advisor and Charter Expert with a look at Europe, Middle East, and Caribbean. Russell Bunger, Lead Mission Support Advisor for our Part 91 operators, focusing on India, the Pacific Rim, and Asia. Adam Hartley joining us from the Global Regulatory Services team, giving you the latest on keeping your operation moving smoothly. And as I mentioned, our Universal Aviation family members joining us, Ina Garcia, Senior Manager Operations Control Center, Universal Aviation Mexico. Oscar Sanchez, Regional Operations Manager, Universal Aviation for Latin America, and an expert in his home country of Costa Rica. And Danilo Rosario, Country Manager and Partner, Universal Aviation Dominican Republic. Warm welcome to all of our panelists. And we're going to get into our content. Now, as we do that, I did want to talk to all of you and get your opinion on something. Now that those COVID restrictions are easing somewhat in some areas, the pent-up demand factor we're hearing is real. So what comes with that? It means that you have to plan trips. And as a result, you may be planning trips into destinations you haven't been in a while. Basically, trip planning is not as simple as it used to be. So I wanted to ask your help with a survey. I'd like to get your opinion on exactly that, just what you're doing to do your research. So let me bring up that poll. All right, you should be hopefully seeing it now on your screen. Is it live? It's giving me, there we go, perfect. So you've got 2 questions. So one at the top is multiple answers. So if you use multiple modes to do your research or tools, please select all of them. Question number 2, if you scroll down, is all about timing. What on average, and if you'll just pick one, how long it takes you to do this kind of research. I want to collect this. I want to share this back with our trip support services teams and some of our management, because this has become a big part of our planning and helping you plan for upcoming trips. All right, so I'm going to give it a couple more seconds. Thank you for your participation. All right, and with that in mind, I'm going to be closing this out. Oh, big jump in respondents, so I'm going to let you guys finish. Thank you. Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Thank you so much. Let me share the results with you. Hang on. All right, so sharing the results. Hopefully you're able to see this on your screen. So it definitely looks like at the top, we've got both going directly to the airport FBO apps and databases, and in particular, looking at, obviously working with companies like us when needed for you to meet your needs, and directly calling the handler definitely at the top of the list. And timing wise, not surprisingly, based on the complexity of things, it looks like we're definitely on the higher end, 45 minutes plus, and even the biggest group up there over an hour. So it does take a chunk of time. I know that's not news to any of you, but again, very valuable intel. Thank you for sharing that with me. Okay, so from here, I do want to go put some of the details, get some of the details out with our experts. So we're going to start off with Adriel. And Adriel comes to us from our trip support teams. He's going to start us off with news on Europe. I know we're seeing more loosening, definitely for Europe, Adriel, and in some cases, dropping of many, if not all, restrictions. What's the latest?
Hey, thanks, Annabelle. As you alluded to, Europe has become easing entry requirements for third country visitors, as well as some of the domestic restrictions for EU nationals and long-term visa holders. For the US nationals, much of the entry requirements remain in place, which includes the passenger locator forms, vaccination certificate, and the COVID entry test. The intra-EU travel has been made easier if you can possess a EU Green Pass, which actually can be arranged by our UA France office. If you're planning to start a trip to Europe in France, I recommend taking advantage of obtaining one of those EU Green Passes, because the EU Green Pass can allow entrance from one EU member country to another without testing requirements. And it'll also allow you to have access to some of the public facilities that you can't have access to without it, or have difficulty having access to it. Some of those changes that you mentioned, the easing of the requirements, we are seeing in countries like Belgium, where you can now enter with a PLF form, passenger locator form, and where it was requiring vaccinations, they have also lowered that to if you have a vaccination or enter with a COVID test. So it's kind of just one of the signs of the relaxation of the entrance into Europe as a whole, compared to how it was last year. And then coming forward, the difference that kind of we're expecting this summer compared to last summer is we anticipate those easings, restrictions easing even more, which will probably result in an increased travel to the summer hotspots in the Mediterranean compared to last year. So we've actually already started seeing an uptick in the business travel on our team in the charter world, but we haven't yet started seeing the uptick in the summer trips coming in for charter. I do anticipate that happening quick, and I strongly recommend, if you have a trip coming up in the summer that you know is going to happen in the Mediterranean, putting your trips in as early as possible, with the note that the regulations, the restrictions for COVID are probably going to change between now and then. And some of these locations won't confirm parking until 2 weeks prior, but it's going to be good to monitor those changes now and as they go on, and have those requests in as early as possible. And then I'll just note that a lot of the country specific entry requirements do remain dependent on the travel history, your nationalities, and your vaccination status. So the specific questions, if you want to shoot them to us or ask the team with some of your details about about the nationalities and your itinerary, we can get you some up-to-date and specific entry requirements for you.
Got it. And no kidding, based on last year's surge in the Mediterranean, having an even higher one this year will be something to plan ahead for. So good advice. All right. Thank you, Adriel. How about the Middle East? What's the latest out of that region?
So the last month or so, we've seen a big uptick in business travel to the Middle East. Countries such as Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, and Kuwait have been the main ones so far. The Middle East is easing in the sense that they're no longer outright prohibiting entrance, but there are still a lot of significant hurdles in obtaining entrance approvals for some of these locations. Visas, COVID tests, vaccinations, and boosters, if your shot's older than 8 to 9 months, are required in most places. One thing we've ran into is that several countries are requiring COVID certificates to have a QR code. And if you don't have a QR code, as most US nationals do not, you have to submit the COVID vaccination to be approved by the local health authorities via an online form. The issue that we've ran into with this is that the communication via the online form with the health authorities can be difficult, and the approval is dependent on the complete and accurate COVID certificate. So you need to know ahead of time whether or not you require a booster, and then submit these forms as early as possible. Waiting until 1 to 2 days prior can lead to not obtaining your entry approvals in time for your scheduled departure. So we strongly recommend that your Middle East trips be in as early as possible, and that you have time to give yourself time to know whether or not you're going to need a booster, and then you have to receive those boosters, and a lot of times wait 14 days or so until you're able to actually apply. So that is one of the big hurdles we've seen run into. We've actually had a trip that had to cancel a trip into Kuwait because they didn't allot enough time to process those health forms for their schedule.
All right, and more good advice, definitely, because the complexity there continues to escalate. Finally, for Adriel, I've asked him to do an update on the Caribbean, since, as we mentioned, this is going to be a hot spot. So what's the latest out of that region?
So compared to last webinar we did, there haven't really been any major updates for the Caribbean. It's kind of still split. Many of the countries are still requiring vaccinations of PAX and sometimes crew for entrance. And those tend to be the islands that are tied to the EU. And then other locations such as the Dominican Republic remain very easy to get into, and other Latin American locations like Costa Rica and Mexico remain very easy to get into. So we anticipate the same summer demand, probably not maybe full pre-COVID, but just as much, if not more, than last year. But just depending on which locations you're going to, the requirements are going to vary kind of greatly depending on kind of what those island nations are tied to.
Got it. And any final trends or notes for the operators, Adriel?
Just again, that this summer we're probably going to see a large uptick to travel into the Mediterranean and Caribbean as we get. I think people are itching to get back out there and not be stuck into the U.S. And as these continue to ease, traffic's going to be getting back up to how it was pre-COVID, I anticipate.
All right.
Hopefully.
Once again, good words of advice from our charter expert. So thank you so much, Adriel. So from here, I want to hand off to Russell so we can get his perspective on a very interesting region here specifically. I asked Russell in particular to deal with the Asia Pacific region because we have been getting inquiries about, hey, is Asia opening? Hey, can I get in? And Russell's here to put some of the reality check on this. There is some good news, but we have a lot of a very conservative approach would be the way to phrase it. So Russell, can you start us off with any news from India?
Certainly. So India is open. Vaccinated, unvaccinated travelers can get into India. Crew and passengers, vaccination certificate. They're not at this time. They're not requiring boosters, so you're good there. If you're vaccinated, then no PCR test is required. Unvaccinated crew and passengers can enter using a PCR test 72 hours within arrival. Recovery letters in India at this time are not accepted. So if you've got that recovery letter, it's not going to work. You have to upload your vaccine certificate and or COVID test to the Air Suvida website. And that's going to generate your health declaration and your QR code that you have to have and show on arrival. India has a bilateral agreement with 84 countries. If you are arriving from one of those 84 countries, then if you are vaccinated, then or as well as unvaccinated, PCR test is not required. If you are coming, again, if you're coming from not one of those 84 countries, then the previous rules apply. Be prepared. They do random testing on arrival, and you actually have to wait at the airport until those test results come back. It could be a PCR test. It could be a rapid antigen. It's just luck of the draw. And in India, domestic flights are allowed, but you need to be flexible because some of those airports are still maybe only operating with 20, 30, 40% staff. So, they may not be able to accommodate you at the time you want because they may be handling commercial flights.
Got it. All right. Moving on into the Southeast Asia region then. So welcome changes, it sounds like, at least in a few areas, or at least signs of hope. So can you dig into some of these for us?
Certainly. So I know Singapore is always a hot topic. They are adding countries to the travel lanes. So here towards the end of the month, they'll be adding Hong Kong, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. And then first part of the first week or so of March, they'll be adding Israel and the Philippines to those travel lanes. Coming from the travel lanes, passengers will no longer need to have a PCR test and will be exempt from quarantine. Passengers, however, will be required to take a supervised rapid antigen test within 24 hours of arrival. And that has to be done at a designated testing center. So they'll tell you where that needs to take place, and you'll find that out before arrival so you can plan accordingly. And there are no changes to the crew policies. Those still remain in place. Malaysia is set to make some announcements the first week of March. They said on or about the 1st. So, I'd give it a couple days after that. But if you really, really have to get in there between now and the 1st of March, the borders are still closed. You can request an exemption from the Director General of Immigrations. That has to be done by your local contact. PCR test 72 hours prior to arrival for crew and passengers. PCR test on arrival. They still have a quarantine. So vaccinated, your quarantine is going to be at least 7 days. Unvaccinated, your quarantine is going to be at least 10. And you can avoid all of that by doing a 14-day stop in Singapore prior to going into Malaysia. Indonesia will allow U.S. citizens, if you're coming in on a diplomatic visa, a temporary permit, or a permit to stay. Beyond that, getting into Indonesia is still very, very hard. All arriving passengers have to undergo COVID testing on arrival and quarantine. You're required to upload your health certificates and your PCR test to their website. And Indonesia does require you to download their mobile app for tracking. You're required to have health insurance. And those are some of the key things for Indonesia. Vietnam, there's some movement taking place for Vietnam. As of right now, foreign nationals can be granted entry into Vietnam on a case-by-case basis and for specific purposes. They do also offer business exemptions, and those business exemptions have to be applied for by your local contact. Everybody has to be fully vaccinated, PCR test within 72 hours of arrival, fill out their health declaration. You have to have your visa prior to arrival. Vietnam still has suspended the visa on arrival. So you have to have that visa before you get there. And unvaccinated persons have to quarantine for at least 7 days. You'll do a test on day 3 and a test on day 7. And once both of those are negative, then you can be out of quarantine. Now, they have made some hints that on or about the 15th, they are proposing a full reopening. So everybody must be vaccinated past the 14 days of your last shot. Your vaccine can't be any older than 6 months. So it's looking like if you're past 6 months on your last vaccination, then you may need that booster, but I haven't seen anything specific to that yet. You can come in on a recovery letter and a past COVID test, but those can not be any older than 6 months. You'll do a PCR test on arrival, a rapid antigen test 24 hours before, or a PCR test before 72 hours before arrival, or a rapid antigen test 24 hours before your departure. You'll take a rapid test within 24 hours of arrival, and you have to have medical insurance for COVID related expenses for Vietnam. Thailand, you can get into Thailand under 3 different programs. The first is called the Alternative Quarantine Program. That's open to everybody, regardless of your vaccination status. If you're vaccinated, you come in, you quarantine for 7 days with a PCR test out. Unvaccinated, 10-day quarantine, PCR test out. The sandbox is still open. Vaccinated or recently recovered only. PCR test on arrival. You have to remain in the sandbox for 7 days before you can be granted free circulation within the country. However, you can leave the sandbox and leave the country at any time. You have to go back to your hotel, Airbnb, wherever you're staying nightly. And after the 7 days, as I said earlier, you get free circulation. The last method there in Thailand is the test and go. You must be vaccinated or recently recovered. You PCR test on arrival. Once you get that PCR test back, you're free circulation within the country. However, on day 5, you have to go to a designated testing facility to do a PCR test, and you remain at that facility until that PCR test comes back. And then lastly, Cambodia. Cambodia is open to foreign nationals. You have to be fully vaccinated. PCR test 72 hours prior to arrival. You'll do a rapid test on arrival. There's no quarantine. If you're not vaccinated, then a 14-day quarantine is required. Vaccinated or unvaccinated, if that test on arrival comes back positive, then you will be required to quarantine and do a test out to be released. Crew remaining overnight in Cambodia must be vaccinated. Everyone has to have health insurance for COVID-related expenses. And again, much like Vietnam, you have to have your visa prior to arrival.
Got it. No, you weren't kidding when we talked about this yesterday. There's a great deal of detail in terms and varied sets of requirements. I guess layers is the right way of saying that, right? All right. And then moving also now into the Pacific Rim countries in particular, what's the latest from those?
Certainly. So Japan is set to announce easing on or about the 1st of March. That's mainly going to be geared towards business travel only. You'll need to do a PCR test within 72 hours of departure. Though there is a quarantine period regardless of your vaccination status. That can be up to 7 days. It could be less. From what I am reading, is a lot of that is geared based off of where you're coming from. They are going to sort of work off of a red, green, amber list, and based off of where you're coming from will sort of dictate your quarantine requirements. One thing about Japan is you have to download some of their mobile apps for tracking during this quarantine period. And basically it's to keep you honest. And if they find out that you are breaking quarantine, then they will put you into a 14-day mandatory quarantine. If you're boosted and arriving from one of their green listed countries, then there'll be no quarantine. And it, again, it does look like that 14-day travel history is going to play a factor in getting into Japan and that quarantine status. South Korea, no real changes to South Korea, is still the same as it's always been. Get that those letters of invitation and exemptions from your local contact. The Philippines, fully vaccinated foreign nationals may enter. There's no quarantine. You must agree to self-health monitoring for 7 days. That's just going to be where you report your health through one of their mobile apps. If not fully vaccinated, then you quarantine for 5 days at a designated facility, PCR tests to get out, and then you'll continue quarantine self-isolation until day 14 at your Airbnb, your home, hotel, wherever. There'll be a PCR test within, your PCR test is within 48 hours of departure, and you have to present your vaccination card on arrival. And then they are still deciding on health insurance, what that's going to look like, if that's going to be a requirement for, and if it's going to be targeted at what your nationality is or your vaccination status. Australia, I know we've seen the news about Australia being open for tourism and the such. When I looked at the Australian Home Ministry, basically our version of their version of our State Department, as well as their Ministry of Health, it really wasn't clear if tourism is wide open. Everything that they are just putting out is designated visa holders, and that there are business travel exemptions. So there may still be a layer of two of the onion in Australia that need to be peeled back a bit more. New Zealand has introduced a 5-phase program. Phases 1 through 3 are going to take pretty much the entire month of March, from what I am seeing. So don't see a whole lot of movement for New Zealand, unless you're, a direct blood relative of somebody in New Zealand, or you're like a guardian or humanitarian reasons. And Taiwan and China are still pretty much locked down, very regulated to get in and regulated while you're there.
Exactly. All right. So as mentioned at the beginning, and I think this was really helpful to illustrate. Thank you, Russell. I know that was a lot to put together, but what's really good about hearing that in that level of detail is to really emphasize that while we're all excited to hear that there are some opportunities opening in Asia, and they're going to continue, needless to say, that 2022, there is the anticipation that we're going to be getting a lot more access. It is going to be multi-layered and complex access. And so setting those expectations early. Thank you so much, Russell, for that. So from here, I want to turn to the US and Canada with Adam Hartley from our Global Regulatory Services team. Hi, Adam, welcome in. And can you get us started with Canada and Mexico? Excuse me, Canada and the US. I don't know where I got Mexico from out of that combo, but go ahead.
Hey, good afternoon, Annabelle. Great news from Canada. And so what we've seen is on February 28th, there's going to be a lower travel health notice level in Canada. So moving from a level 3 to a level 2, which means all the restrictions on non-essential travel are going to be dropped, as well as the opening up of all of their international airports. Currently, they're restricted only to 18 available international AOEs. That's going to open up. So all airports that were AOEs pre-COVID are going to return to being AOEs on February the 28th, as well as a removal of secondary testing requirements on arrival into Canada, the random secondary testing that they were doing, as well as relying more on instant test or rapid test as a tool versus PCR lab testing. So great news from Canada. Things are definitely loosening up and look more normal, I guess you would say. In the US, we haven't seen any changes. So there's a couple of things I want to highlight on the regulatory front as far as the US. Obviously, with the tensions with Russia, we saw that the administration put some more sanctions out there on specific Russian oligarchs, some specific people in the Russian government. Universal obviously watches sanctions very closely and has our compliance department that helps manage those things. But it's really important for U.S. operators to understand what and who has been sanctioned, especially if you're going to be operating in Eastern Europe or over in Russia anytime soon, to understand how do you stay on the good side of those sanctions. The other response to the conflict right now is that CBP is making allowances for people who are fleeing that conflict from the Ukraine to come to the U.S. With lighter testing requirements and things like that when it comes to COVID. But for the U.S., we're still seeing vaccination requirements. Your crew remain exempt, and testing with 1 day prior to travel. That stays in place. I know there were lots of requests to look into the crystal ball, but we've been going through the different news sites who generally get the information leaving the meeting versus waiting for the proclamation. But there's not even smoke out there yet as far as official proclamation changes or official CDC changes coming. That doesn't mean that it won't happen tomorrow. There's just not been any direct communications about it really on a media front or on a government front as of yet. With this time and opportunity to talk to operators, I think it's important. And I'll leave Mexico and the update for Mexico for Hina. But the important part for me in talking to operators right now, especially if you haven't been out and traveling internationally as frequently as you have in the past, as you return to flight, for me, it's all about being prepared. It's all about being prepared on a couple of different fronts. So as an operator, having your maximum flexibility, looking into things like the RSP program, reimbursable services here in the States to maximize your customs overtime at the ports that are important to you. The visa waiver program, we still are having discussions with people about the visa waiver program and becoming a signatory carrier who are scared off or concerned by some verbiage that's on there from the late 80s and early 90s. So we'd like an opportunity to discuss that with operators if they're concerned or if that's keeping them out of the signatory carrier program. The conflict that's going on between the U.S. and Russia and all of the other major geopolitical players brings something like STEP enrollment for your U.S. travelers into play, registering U.S. travelers with the State Department when they're traveling abroad, giving them not only detailed travel advisories, but also the fast pass to get out of Dodge, if the stuff hits the fan, right? Being a known quantity to the U.S. government, the biggest resource out there in the world, being known to them should you be in a major issue, major situation, or even minor, where you've lost something like a passport or something of that nature, where the consulate can help you in an expedited fashion if you are enrolled in STEP. So I encourage everybody who's taken American citizens abroad and not enrolling in STEP to at least look into that program and the benefits that it can provide to your travelers. The other side of that is the operations team itself. So making sure that your operations team is trained and has their recurrency done and feels confident operating in this environment. Universal's hosting an FAA dispatch course right now. Gary Martin and his team are working through an FAA certification. We've got 3 more on the schedule for this year. We've got 3 recurrent training events scheduled before June. So we'd love to talk to people about those opportunities, as well as how we can help fortify your operations team, as well as your operations capabilities. So with that, I'll kick it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Adam. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of those courses is going to be just in advance of the Schedules and Dispatchers Conference coming up in April, right?
Absolutely. So Universal is the vendor and selected provider for the PDP course. It leads into schedulers and dispatchers. So Gary Martin and Juan Muniz, as well as myself, will definitely be there in San Diego. So yeah, that's another great opportunity. It's also emissions reporting season. So if you're involved in global emissions, Universal will be hosting a webinar on March 3rd for our global emissions clients to discuss how we sprint to the end of 2021's reporting season.
Right. And if you have any questions about that, for Adam, especially about emissions, you can reach out to us at that operational insight univway.com email, everything that you see for this webinar, or reach out to Adam directly. So we'll connect you with him on the emissions front. Great. Thank you, Adam. Much appreciated. So from here, I'm going to bring on one of our new guests. So Ina Garcia with our Mexico office. Buenas tardes. Bienvenidos, Ina. It's a pleasure to have you as a first-time guest, and I'm excited to hear the updates from Mexico. So about Mexico, we've continued to see high traffic volumes throughout the pandemic, with some destinations having their busiest traffic periods since about 2009. What's your outlook now coming up for the spring and the rest of the spring-summer?
Thank you, Annabelle, and hola y gracias a todos. Under the post-pandemic scenario that we're facing right now, we expect an increase in the volume operations since we consider that the health protocols are more flexible in Mexico right now. Right now, there's a high volume going on Cancun and Los Cabos, especially, like you said, but since June 2020, operations has been increasing even more than before COVID-19. Then for us, it's been busy time, and we don't even expect a low season this year. Actually, operations are only increasing for us. As we know, there's a company that is no longer operating in our major airport, and that for us, for Universal Aviation Mexico, is expected more operations. Then we are so happy to having a lot of work.
Good. Well, I know you are staying busy. So speaking of that extra traffic, though, can you get into more about parking and hotels in terms of what's impacting those particular destinations, especially Cancun and Los Cabos?
Sure. Actually, for parking and hotels, we always recommend that, first of all, and program with anticipation. That's something really important, because some of these airports for parking, there's a lot of restrictions going on, like in San Jose, Los Cabos. There's restrictions for maybe a quick turns. You just have to do a quick turns in that places. Also, there's restrictions on the peak hours. And for some special hotels, there will be like a lot of booking prior. That always anticipate and program your trips. Also, ask us if you use us as a handler, ask us for a report for the best hours for arrivals in these special airports.
Oh, that makes sense. Good advice on that. Any local COVID restrictions that visitors should be aware of when they're on the ground?
Actually, at this moment, there's no restrictions in Mexico. The only thing that will maybe advise you that we require to use a mask in public places, in crowd places, and indoors. That's the only thing that you going to face in the country, but to enter, there's nothing yet, at all. Yeah.
So open entry and just a few minor restrictions still in place.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And then as far as the sad news when people have to leave your beautiful country and head off to their next destination, what is the accessibility for COVID testing like?
Actually, there's easy. There's through, usually the passengers arrange the testing through the hotels where they stay at. Maybe in the airport, in the commercial areas, there's places where you can take this. And through us, we can arrange everything for our passengers. You requested, and we, of course, have this arranged for you. Just you need to contact us.
Got it. And finally, any major events that could be impacting traffic into operations operations into Mexico?
Actually, we are just so excited for spring breaks coming and summertime. There's a lot of beautiful places that we expect a lot of visitors, but also for the end of the year, we have coming the Grand Prix Mexico, also NFL, it's on again, and we have Baja 1000 too. This is for the end of the year. For right now, spring break and summertime is we are waiting for visitors all over the countries.
All right, so we'll keep our focus on the spring and summer for now, but definitely be planning ahead. Our message across all of our locations, plan ahead. Thank you very much, Ina. It's great to have you on. Hopefully not the last time we'll see you. So, and please stay with us for some questions. From here, I would like to reintroduce all of you to Oscar Sanchez with our Costa Rica office and also has connections with all of our Latin America Universal Aviation locations. So actually, Oscar was one of my very first guests back in the fall of 2020, very early on when we started the webinar, as well as we were starting to talk about operations as they began back in the fall of 2020. And what was so unique about Costa Rica at the time, it was one of the only destinations that leisure destinations in particular that people could get into, and it was super busy then. And I know you're busy now, but it is awesome to have you back. So welcome. I'd love to get a few perspectives from you on the current state. So what is the current operating environment like in Costa Rica? And any changes or restrictions? Are things pretty open still?
Thanks, Annabelle, and pura vida, everyone. Yeah, the country remains open and with very few entry requirements. Actually, all hotel and tourist locations are open and ready for our visitors.
Excellent news. So what advice do you have for anyone planning a mission into Costa Rica during what's going to be no doubt a continued, but in addition, busier season for spring break and then the March-April timeframe?
Annabelle, we highly recommend to plan ahead. Parking may and will become an issue due to high demand during the next few months. Booking hotels and rent-a-cars can be an issue and challenge as well.
Okay, so again, with the planning ahead, but don't forget the particulars on the other assets needed, rental cars and hotels. So in that next 30 to 60 day period, any particular congestion spots that to be aware of?
March will be very congested. We're already seeing a lot of requests for March, and typically that's our highest peak month of the year. So the traffic will continue to grow in the next 45 days. So again, please plan ahead and send your handling request as soon as you know of a possible trip.
All right, that applies to both airports, correct? So as far as the general aviation terminal, I wanted to just touch on this because it did open in San Jose about 2 years ago at this point. So how is it going with the GAT, and are you seeing any benefits to the ground experience for passengers?
Yeah, absolutely. The new facility has played a key role during the last 2 years, and especially during the peak of the pandemic last year. The GAT is now the preferred facility for general aviation customers due to time cut and convenience while departing or arriving at San Jose Airport.
Absolutely, and I can say with some authority here that it is a beautiful facility. I had the awesome benefit of going down last summer, had a personal trip to Costa Rica. I got to meet Oscar and his team, and I got to see the GAT in person, and it is truly a beautiful facility, private and accessible, and makes for a wonderful experience. So it was a treat to see it myself. I'm sure that our passengers and crew are enjoying it as well. So, and yes, I do plan to go back soon because Costa Rica was amazing. All right. Any local COVID restrictions, Oscar, to note for our visitors?
Well, now local restrictions are very basic. To wear a mask in public places and some special distancing is what is required mostly. Government has announced that in the next few weeks, most of the restrictions will be eliminated. So we're heading there.
Excellent. All right. So nothing but good news also out of Costa Rica. And I know you're preparing for the influx of visitors and additional traffic. So thank you so much for that. And from here, I want to introduce everyone to Danilo Rosario, our country manager and partner for Dominican Republic. I get the pleasure of hosting Danilo each year when he is with us at NBAA base. He's definitely establishes himself at our booth every year, and he's very popular among our clients because his destination is a beautiful one and definitely very popular. So I'm trying to find Danny here on my screen so that I can highlight him for everyone. All right, let me bring him up. Little bit of a delay, my apologies, but Danilo, go ahead. I would love to welcome you. And can you tell us what's the current operating environment in the Dominican? Any new restrictions or changes, or are things still pretty open as they have been?
Hi, everyone from Dominican Republic. Yes, Dominican Republic is still the #1 destination in the Caribbean for private aviation due to the strong response of the COVID health measure the government implemented during 2020. The whole population is almost complete vaccinated. So, and the open border policy that it was established since the beginning. As a result of last week, the government announced the lift of all restrictions for COVID. So at this moment, there's no restriction in place in the DR at the moment. You can freely walk in and go to out of your hotel, go to plaza, malls, shopping centers, and restaurants, and you'll be free to not present a vaccination card or a mask. We recommend everyone to use a mask, but it's right now it's not mandatory.
Excellent. Any advice for our operators planning a mission to the Dominican during spring break?
Dominican Republic has been always a very friendly destination for permits, and if you are private, you just have to file a flight plan, give us a call, and we'll be here 24/7 to assist you. But if you are planning a commercial operation, we would strongly suggest give us a call 48 hours in advance, and so we can go and process your permit. But anyhow, if you have a last minute call from your clients or boss, just give us a call. We will be able to accommodate and do a last minute permit. We can always get you if you are operating to the North Coast, now we are in every airport in Dominican Republic. As last year, we just opened up 3 more destinations. So we got you covered all over in the Dominican Republic.
Very good news there. Any particular locations with congestion issues, airports that they need to be aware of?
If you're planning to operate into the North Coast, especially Puerto Plata and Samaná, if you come into a golf tournament or celebration, private celebration, and you know there's going to be a couple of air jets or airplanes coming, give us a heads up, because runway space is not usually congested, but it's limited. So we can get you a PPR and do a reservation for you, so you have no issues going into the North Coast, especially Samaná and Puerto Plata.
Excellent. And then finally, just a note on COVID testing when people have to leave. Any advice there?
We have testing in all hotels, but if you prefer to have tested in the airport, our universal aviation facilities have local providers, labs that can go and do the tests at the airport or at your hotel, whatever your location is. We have a list of all the labs available to do that.
Excellent. All right. So judging by that picture behind you or that video behind you, I will be making a trip to the Dominican very soon. So thank you so much, Danilo. Very good to have you, and to all of our panelists, thank you. So I'm going to move now from here to our pre-submitted questions. That's the ones that you kindly sent in advance to us. So let's go to those. While I do that, just a reminder, if you haven't already sent in a question and it's not being answered in the chat as we go, please go ahead and do that right now. Lewis is collecting those in the background. Okay, so the first question I have is, and I know that Adam addressed this a bit, but just to be 100% clear, any updates on the CDC restoring a COVID test to enter the US, moving it back to a 72-hour window versus the current 24-hour window for Adam?
That's certainly everybody in BizAv, all operators and pilot and crew and everybody is talking about it. The only people who aren't talking about it is the CDC or the US government at this point. So we don't have anything, any leaks from the administration and the media or anything that tells us what kind of time frame they're looking at there.
Got it. All right. And so from here, the next question is Adriel, since you focused on Europe today. Is there anything we should know about crossing ground borders within the Schengen area? We have a trip coming up, this is from the operator, where a passenger is going to Germany, nearest airport is Switzerland, and the recommended route takes them through France.
Yeah, sorry, can you hear me? For the
Yes.
For the ground border questions, some of those questions, if you pose them to the team, we can and give some more details for you. We can get those specifics with the local handlers and stuff, but the ground border questions are all very specific on your unique situation and not something that is readily available. So unfortunately, I don't have an answer specifically to your question, but most of the time, traveling by ground or air, you typically have to require a PLF form, a passenger locator form, to enter. And then it's going to depend on your nationality. If you have a green pass, your vaccination status, and where you're coming from, and like I said, travel history. So if you can get those details to us, we could fully answer that question for you.
Got it. So back to the specifics of your unique situation, passenger, crew, travel history, etc. Always going to impact the answer to these. This next one's a bit for Adriel as well, and also a bit detailed. So on the Caribbean side, do you have any information on Jamaica? They're really looking for all kinds of info around what the latest is on COVID testing for the fully vaccinated and safety factors there, and then really logistics of parking, fuel. How accessible are services?
And I know there's a safety question on there as well. But right now, Jamaica is open. All foreign crew and passengers have to obtain a travel health authorization online prior to arrival. They recommend that process starts 7 days prior to your departure, and then a COVID PCR test or antigen test on arrival for travelers from high-risk countries like the US, and that costs about $150 at your own expense to do that. And then you'd have to quarantine for 14 days at either a residence or a tourist hotel. But the fully vaccinated travelers, they have an option to shorten their mandatory 8-day quarantine by taking an additional PCR test on arrival. And if that test comes back negative, then you're released from quarantine. And then Annabelle, what was the other part of that question? That was a long one.
There was a follow-up on that saying specifically, is it best to get an overflight for Cuba or go around?
Cuba's easy to get, especially that's typically not the issue. What I will say is if this is a charter flight and you have to have a Jamaica landing permit, and this isn't part of the question, but the caveat that everybody runs into on ASAP stuff is that Jamaica is the one country in the Caribbean whose insurance requirements are a little different. So you have to have $100 million insurance, 100 million, and then there's an additional like 120,000 for each additional packs, and then $50 for every ton over 18,000 pounds. So getting last minute insurance updates can be an issue for a lot of people. And this is something we run into over and over. So I know it wasn't part of the question, but if it is charter, let's double check your insurance policy. And then for parking, we haven't really ran into much parking issues lately in Jamaica. We've done a lot of pickups from Jamaica, but we haven't had a lot of trips going in and parking.
You're right, because we haven't had Jamaica often as a topic, so that was a good one. Adam, so the next question was for you or in your area, or at least I'm handing it to you. Is there a difference between a travel rapid antigen test compared to one you can buy at a local store? And are there any news or plans to revise the current CDC attestation form in particular?
There has been no note about changing of the attestation form. God knows, I don't think it could get any longer. So hopefully, if there's a change coming, it'll simplify things. But every country has very specific guidance on what rapid tests are available to them. You know, like Canada just made a antigen test available for a specific part of their testing policy. So I would say, not just any rapid test that you get from HEB or somewhere like that could be accepted, but there are rapid tests with qualifications from your countries that are accepted for different parts of their COVID requirements. So I know that's a very general answer, but I would say that the key thing is a rapid test off the shelf. You should not trust that. You need to verify with your specific locations and look at how those test results. It's usually about how those test results on the rapid are communicated versus and how they're documented, which makes the difference between a rapid test that you would get from the store and something that's acceptable to a government agency.
Got it. Makes sense. Thank you for that. Adriel, or would you track that detail down? Are you ready?
Yeah, I scrolled down a little further. Yes, the answer is yes. According to Netherlands website, is you must show a negative test result even if you have proof of vaccination or a digital COVID certificate of certificate of recovery. Yeah, so answer is yes.
Excellent. All right. Okay, well, I think that covers most of our pre-submitted questions. And I know that some of them actually got answered as we went. We added on some content from our speakers. Thank you all for being so thorough and so well prepared. Lewis, are we ready with any live questions? And I know we are at our usual time, but we can stay on for a few extra minutes to answer if we've got some live questions or from the live audience. So happy to stay on for as long as you all want to stay with us and get some of those answered.
Yeah, thanks, Annabelle. We just had a few. So I'm just going to throw this one to the group, whoever wants to answer it. But have there been any changes in pet travel requirements when entering the USA from an international location? Anything, especially maybe focusing on the Caribbean, anything that like if you're bringing a dog back to the USA, pet vaccinations, rabies, et cetera, any changes?
No, I mean, this the same documentation, shot records still apply for bringing animals into the States. They have to be vaccinated, not for COVID, but for other things, right? And you have to have those shot records.
Thanks, Adam. One more, maybe Russell or the group. Do we anticipate Japan to return to visas issued on the spot anytime soon?
That in the opening information, visas was not covered. That'd be something that we would actually probably need to check into based off of your trip parameters. There may be a little bit more information that that's fed off of based off of where you're coming from. So I would suggest reaching out to us with potential schedules so that we could address those questions.
Thanks, Russell. And then there was, if you could very briefly just go over the, if you're boosted arriving from a green country to Japan, the rest of the requirements.
So for Japan, if you're boosted and arriving from low risk or green country, then they're saying that there's no quarantine required. However, you do have to take that COVID test on arrival. So based off of what the result of that test is, if it's negative, then based off of the proposed opening criteria, you're free to go. If it's positive, then I'm guessing you go into quarantine until you get that negative test.
All right, thank you, Russell. Annabelle, I believe that's all the questions we had live. All right, we actually have one more just came in.
And I was real quick, Lewis, I was posting a follow-up because the rabies thing stuck in my head for a second, and I remember that they did post something there. There is a temporary notice out about specific countries where they feel like there's a rabies issues around. I posted a link in the chat about your main page, but also I'll post another link that shows which countries are considered to be high risk right now. And there is a document and certification that you can bring to still import animals, but it is a bigger issue or more detailed process with these specific high risk countries right now.
Thanks, Adam. We had a question about Belgium. Is there any issue with a non-vaccinated crew entering Belgium at this time, and passengers too? So I guess any issues with non-vaccinated passengers or crew entering Belgium?
I don't know off the top of my head, to be honest with you, Lewis. I will have to do some digging. I was looking at it earlier. Well, actually, yeah. So from what I looked at earlier, Belgium actually reduced their entry requirements that you can now enter with the PLF, the locator form, and either the vaccination or a COVID test within 72 hours, PCR test within 72 hours. And then I think it was an antigen within 24. But yes, there was a caveat. They changed it recently where you could enter without a vaccination.
Great, thanks, Adriel. And then the last one, can we get a update on St. Martin? Any parking or fuel concerns and requirements on quarantine for U.S. citizens and PACs and crew?
Yeah, so for St. Martin, it's always a busy spot. I'm sure when Crystal asked this question, I think it was her in chat. She's probably very familiar with their parking issues that they have. Let me get to the entry requirements, because if crew are going to be tech stopping, they're not going to need anything. But if they're going to stay over a certain amount of time, then they're going to pretty much be required the same requirements as the passengers. But I have here, and I will post it in chat. Essentially, there's the health form, the EHOS form, and then they have a differentiation. If you're fully vaccinated with the booster, then there's like no test required. If you're fully vaccinated, but don't have the booster and it's over a certain amount of time, you're going to have a COVID test as well. And then children under 5 don't require one. And then if you aren't vaccinated, or if you're not fully vaccinated or not vaccinated, you have to have a COVID test within 48 hours of arrival, PCR test within 48 hours. And then, Lewis, was there another part to that question about parking? And I was saying on that one is that St. Martin typically always gets congested around spring break and the summer, parts of the summer, and then obviously New Year, Christmas time, but that's passed. So I recommend putting those requests in a month out, because that's when it started happening for us in December for Christmas. They were looking all the way back to September, who put the request in September. So that'd be my recommendation if you're trying to park there for a week or so.
And just to follow up, the last part was fuel. Any fuel concerns?
I don't have any fuel information or concerns. That's something we probably have to follow up with World Fuel Services to get the latest information, because I don't have that.
Got it.
All right,
Thank
that was
you.
all we had from the live questions, Annabelle.
Awesome. Thank you, Adriel, Russell, Adam, and Lewis for putting those together. And that concludes today. So I really want to thank you all, as always, for joining us. Your questions are always welcome in advance, and even right after this session, we tend to get some questions back that help us plan for the next program. So keep those coming. I do look forward to seeing as many of you as possible if you're going to be there in March at the NBAA International Operators Conference in Los Angeles. I will be there, and actually some of our panelists are going to be there too. So I'll have actually Russell Bunger on our team there live in Los Angeles, and Ina with Mexico is going to be there with us as well. And then other members of our webinar team that you've seen in the past, Juan Munoz and Laura Everington for Global Regulatory Services, they're going to be at IOC with us. So do stop by our hospitality suite and say hi. We'd love to meet you in person as always. Drop us a note with anything at operationalinsight@univway.com. Lewis can put that in the chat. Remember, we will send you a copy or give you access to a copy of the chat in the same link where you'll find the video for today. That'll go out in tomorrow's Ops Update email. Again, a pleasure to have you, and thank you to my expert team Look forward to seeing you guys again somewhere between IOC and Schedulers Conference in April. That one's in San Diego. So we'll schedule the next time and let you know when we're going to be online. All right. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next time.